Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is set to give us a look at a ton of different realities throughout the larger Marvel Multiverse. Not super surprising, considering the title. With those different versions of Earth, we will also be getting some different versions of established MCU characters. But who could we see? And how could they be different from the versions that we already know and love? Well, sit back and relax as I take you through all of the possibilities that we have any evidence for at all. From those we've seen in trailers or TV spots, to ones that have popped up as parts of toy leaks, and more. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's start this video off with the variant that we have gotten the most footage of out of nearly all of them, and yet know the least about his actual involvement in the movie. Defender Strange. This version of Dr. Stephen Strange doesn't really seem to differ all that much in regards to his physical appearance from our baseline main continuity Stephen Strange. His hair is longer, seemingly tied back in a ponytail with some gray streaks on the side, and his outfit is a bit different. Beyond that, there really isn't much there. His appearance here is actually fairly similar to the one that the character wore back in 2010 during the Matt Fraction and Terry Dodson run on Defenders, which saw the good doctor swap out his traditional blue duds for the red and black affair this character seems to be wearing a version of. Beyond that, it's hard to tell how much the Defenders comics are influencing this version of Strange. At one point in the trailer, we see him unraveling from some magical bandages, probably the same ones that make up the monster that we saw terrorizing America Chavez a shot prior. So maybe this is a more villainous version of Strange, maybe even the film's true antagonist. Hard to say at this point, but there is definitely something going on with the guy. To go along with Defender Strange, we also have Defender Wong. This is one variant that we know basically nothing about. It's possible that the Wong that we saw facing off against Zombie Strange, don't worry, I'll get to him in a moment, is Defender Wong, but I cannot say for sure at this point. In fact, the only real proof we have that there is a Wong variant at all is the fact that a toy leak came out a little while ago showing a series of Multiverse of Madness related figures, and among them is one labeled Defender Wong. And that's really it. That's all the info we have on him. I mean, I can assume that he probably works alongside Defender Strange, but that's about it. And even then, that is still potentially questionable. If Defender Strange is an antagonist, perhaps Defender Wong is working against him, and is actually the one who pulls the MCU Strange into the plot, kicking off the action. Just kinda spitballing here. Now let's get to that Zombie Strange. At the end of the trailer, we got a chance to see what appeared to be a rather twisted, corrupted version of Strange, summoning up some black, evil-looking arms in that way that Strange tends to do. And that was it. That was all that we got in the trailer, which left a lot of us speculating about what exactly was going on there. Then, shortly after the trailer was released, we got a TV spot that showed us yet another shot of this variant, giving us a close-up look. And that is very clearly a zombie version of the character. I mean, look at him, he's missing chunks of meat out of his hands. It's actually a little gross. Now, this is probably not the same one we saw in What If, as that one kinda got, well, unalived. But since this is a multiverse with infinite possibilities, there could just be another reality with zombies that he hails from. As far as what role he could play in the movie, that's questionable. It could be that he is in possession of some necessary MacGuffin, or maybe he is at one point summoned in by our protagonist in order to distract our heroes. Tough to tell. Either way, I'm always down to see more zombies in the Marvel Universe. Easily one of my favorite alternate realities in the entire multiverse. Especially when it crossed over with Army of Darkness. So good. Of course, I would be remiss to not bring up the idea of having Strange Supreme from What If pop up in the movie, especially considering the fact that many people are assuming that the sort of twisted-looking Strange that we see in the trailer is in fact Strange Supreme. And some of the merchandise that we have seen leaks from, mainly the one that also gave us Defender Wong, has solidified the idea of him popping up. However, I actually question if the Strange that we see in the trailer is actually Strange Supreme, or Supreme Strange, as the toy leak refers to him. Some fan theories have been floating around recently that argue that the one that we see in the trailer is actually a completely different variant than the one that we are thinking that it is. Perhaps even not a version of Strange at all, but instead Nightmare, the Lord of the Dream Dimension, simply taking on the form of Doctor Strange in order to mess with the MCU one. Instead, these theories argue that Strange Supreme might be a part of the multiversal Illuminati that it looks like we're getting in the movie. Not 100% on the Nightmare thing, but you know, the toy sure does look a whole lot more put together and less greasy than the one we're getting in the movie, so maybe there is something to it. And yes, I know that it is a toy, so it's probably going to be friendlier looking, but you get what I mean. Speaking of that multiverse Illuminati, I'm gonna bring up the idea of us getting a variant of Tony Stark, despite the lack of any real solid evidence for his inclusion. And yes, I know about the shot in that TV spot that everyone thinks looks like a version of Superior Iron Man, but I actually think that's a completely different character entirely, so I'm gonna get to that here in a little bit. For a while though, people have been talking about Tom Cruise coming in and playing a version of Tony Stark, serving as a member of the Illuminati. And based off of those robotic guards we've seen in the trailers and such, I think it is a safe bet to assume that some version of the character might just spring up. But what would this variant look like? Well, it's hard to really come up with any ideas when you have literally no hints at his inclusion outside of the appearance of those guards. So I'm not going to go on too much of a limb and throw one out willy-nilly. Just knowing that we might be getting a variant Stark is really enough for me anyways. Okay, so now I'll address the TV spot character that people are guessing is a Superior Iron Man. I think this one is actually pretty easy. That is very clearly a version of Captain Marvel. Just look at some of the armor pieces on the arms and chest. Those look very similar to the suit that Carol Danvers wears in the MCU, and the face mask is pretty close as well. However, that being said, I am guessing that this is not Carol Danvers. Based on the way the character is moving and a few other physical markers, I am going to boldly throw my support behind all of the fans who are theorizing that this character is actually Maria Rambeau, as portrayed by Lashana Lynch. How this particular variant of Captain Marvel came to be is fairly easy to explain as well. In her home reality, when Mar-Vell was trying to escape the Kree with the Tesseract, instead of Danvers flying her away from the base, Rambeau did. From there, everything played out nearly exactly like we saw them in Captain Marvel, just with Rambeau in place of Danvers. Meaning she was the one who got hit with the Tesseract energy and then taken away by Yon-Rogg to become a Kree agent. Based on what we're seeing in the TV spot and trailer, that seems a lot more likely to me than it being Superior Iron Man. Or Nova. Sorry, Nova fans, this probably isn't where he's gonna pop up. He will definitely be introduced to the MCU somewhere, I just don't think it's here. Of course, in the trailer, we see Captain Marvel facing off with Wanda Maximoff, inferring that Wanda will eventually attack the Illuminati facility. Now, this could just be our main continuity MCU Wanda. She certainly has plenty of reasons to be a tad bit angry. However, what if that is instead a variant Wanda? Perhaps one that has been twisted and warped by the many-angled ones. The last time we saw Wanda, she was spending some quality time studying the Darkhold, an ancient tome that in the comics is directly linked with Chthon, one of the great old ones, who are basically Lovecraftian monsters of immense power. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that they might conjure up a version of Wanda that is under their control, in order to try to turn more people against her so that they can further control her. So maybe that Wanda is one that's a little bit more akin to the Cancerverse version of her, one that's from a world that was corrupted by the many-angled ones. Or perhaps this is some form of the zombie Wanda we saw in What If. This shot here shows Wanda making some very twisted, almost zombie-like movements. And since we never did see what ultimately happened to that zombie, the door is still open. Sure, she was on a planet that exploded, but you know how this works. If we don't see a body, they ain't 100% dead. Basic movie rules 101. Of course, with a lot of talk centering around the idea of a multiverse Illuminati, we gotta bring up the idea of an Elder Strange, one that has a seat amongst them. Recently, Bruce Campbell, actor and lifelong friend of Multiverse of Madness director Sam Raimi, tweeted out a picture of himself in a makeup chair, seemingly being done up to look like Doctor Strange. Now, admittedly, he posted this on April 1st, which is extremely suspect for obvious reasons. However, we know for sure that he will have a cameo in the movie, as he nearly always does in all of Raimi's films. So the idea of him playing a variant of Strange, perhaps an older, more experienced one, isn't too far outside the realm of possibility. And as someone who once said that if they ever had to cast the MCU set in the 90s, they would totally cast Bruce Campbell as Doc Strange, I for one would love to see this happen. One of the characters that is often brought up in regards to the Illuminati in the comics is T'Challa. So naturally, people have been discussing the possibility of seeing him have a seat on this multiversal Illuminati. Like with Doctor Strange in the last entry, it could be interesting to see some older actor take on the role, giving us a wiser, elder version of the character. Given his relationship with the late Chadwick Boseman, having Denzel Washington come in to play the part briefly would be really awesome to see. As Boseman once said, "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington. And not just because of me, but my whole cast. That generation stands on your shoulders." So while I don't have any hard evidence that this is going to happen, and it's all kinda just wishful thinking at this point, this film would be a fantastic opportunity to honor both Boseman and Washington in a fantastically nerdy way. At this point, the role of Christine Palmer in the film is really hard to pin down. We have seen her in the trailer in a few different spots, but how she actually gets roped into this multiverse hopping adventure is hard to figure out. Well, what if she's tagging along because the one that we see hanging out with Strange isn't the same one that we see getting married? What if she's a variant? I bet you're surprised that that's where I was going with this. In the comics, Strange's longtime love interest is a woman named Clea, the Sorcerer Supreme of the Dark Dimension and the sister to Dormammu. As of this recording, we haven't heard anything about Clea appearing in the MCU. However, a recent fan theory posits that this is because Rachel McAdams will actually be playing a version of the character, who is simply the Dark Dimension analog of Christine. Could be a really cool parallel to draw, since Dormammu in the first film was played by Benedict Cumberbatch, making him a dark version of Strange in a way. Having his love interest in this new film be the dark version of his love interest from the last one would be interesting to say the least. And since one of the wrap gifts that members of the crew received after the film finished shooting was an issue of the Doctor Strange comic that prominently featured Clea, 1981's Doctor Strange number 48 if you're curious, it isn't crazy to think that she might have some role to play in the movie. Say what you will about Ultron, and I'm sure that most of you can say a lot, but the basic idea behind the big bad bot isn't a terrible idea. Having an army of metal soldiers set to protect the world from outside threats sounds pretty good to me. You know, the whole suit of armor around the world thing that Tony Stark is always talking about. So it's pretty safe to assume that if it was approached in a different way, with a few more safeguards in place and not using energy from the Mind Stone that no one could possibly understand, Ultron could actually have worked out for the better. And maybe that was the case for our alternate reality Iron Man. Hence why the guards we see escorting Strange in the trailer look like fancy upgraded Ultron drones. Maybe this is a variant of Ultron that is a lot closer to Jarvis than the homicidal AI that we saw in that second Avengers film. And maybe this could be the way that we could get Ultron back into the MCU. Basically, since Age of Ultron came out, fans have been saying that they felt like the character, who was one of the most dangerous foes the Avengers have ever faced in the comics, was a tad bit wasted in a single movie like that. So maybe this film will give us an origin for a new one that can come back in the future as a threat once again. I'd be on board for it. Maybe even get us a step closer to seeing a live-action version of Infinity Ultron. Could be pretty cool. Tell me I'm wrong. So we know for a fact that we are going to at least see Wanda's children in the movie. Whether or not they're going to play a direct role in what is going on and appear on screen for longer than a shot or two, that we cannot say for sure. However, we can assume that if the characters are going to continue forward in the MCU, perhaps for a future Young Avengers movie that they seem to be building towards, they might just have to be aged up a tad in order to fit in. And that is where variant versions of them could come in. Variant versions that just happen to be, teenage aged, if that makes any sense. Imagine this. Wanda reaches across the multiverse looking for versions of her children that she can pull back into her reality. And she manages to find a pair, perhaps two from a world that is dying or something like that, in order to justify keeping them around. But they just so happen to be young adults, as opposed to full-on children. That could be one way they could go with it. One avenue they could go down that would allow them to have the boys be just a tad bit older. Or, they could not do that and just hand wave it away as chaos magic weirdness like they did the last time that they aged up. Either way works, I suppose, but I feel like this way is a little bit more fun. And it would allow them to sort of play off of the same kind of idea that they had in the comics where the kids weren't entirely sure that they were actually brothers or even actually Scarlet Witch's kids. It's a small little plot detail, but I think it could do a lot for characterization. But then again, maybe that would over bloat this movie and it's kind of the sort of thing that you just don't really want to stuff in there unnecessarily. Though Marvel and Disney have shown that they can take something that really should be over bloated and still make it work. Somehow. I think Kevin Feige made a deal with the devil or something, which is oddly appropriate when talking about Scarlet Witch. Hey there everybody, I'm John Alditz. I made this video and I want to know what you think. What variants would you like to see in Multiverse of Madness? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.